Hi, I'm Charlie, and welcome to the Quiet Craftsman. Now, this is a relatively young channel with not much content yet. My plan is for this to be a home for projects that I complete within my small apartment workshop that you see behind me. Now, this is actually a dining room, although not a lot of dining takes place here anymore. Sorry, honey. It's a relatively simple shop. It's a cheap workbench I got from Harbor Freight, a folding table, my 3D printer, and tools strewn about. Um, there isn't really room for a table saw or any large pieces of equipment, and with a neighbor on the other side of that wall, to be honest, noise is a concern too. This apartment is much better, however, than my old one back in Boston. My neighbor once complained that I was carving a pumpkin too loudly for Halloween, so it's definitely a step up. Still, I don't have a dedicated workspace. Not quite sure when that'll be a possibility, and until then, I don the moniker of the Quiet Craftsman and hope that the projects I have in the pipeline show that, even a relatively modest workshop, you can complete some pretty cool things. Now, one of my favorite techniques to get around the limitations of a small apartment workshop like this is actually this. It's a model, of course, but it's a 2005 Toyota Corolla. It could be any car, but this is mine, and I actually painted this model to better represent mine, including the missing hubcaps, although I need to shade out another one. That's another story. I tend to use my car as a satellite shop, or let's say an auxiliary building, to the main Quiet Craftsman campus, which is the dining room. For woodworking projects, for instance, I'll actually just load up a little workmate workbench and a cordless circular saw. I'll take that down to the home improvement center and cut to size my lumber right there in the parking lot, which means that I'm not running a saw in my dining room, and space is less of a limitation. I know that you can ask an employee to make a few cuts for you, but when you're building something like a workbench or a bed frame with potentially dozens of cuts, I like to cut it all right to size out the back of my trunk and then take it home and do the final assembly in the apartment. Now, while the Corolla is a reliable, economic, and practical car, the point of this video is to find a different vehicle that would either join or replace it and aligns with my maker aspirations. Curiously, Ford seems to have had the same kind of idea. In their marketing materials, they literally refer to the bed of their new compact pickup truck, the Maverick, as a makerspace, which I find is pretty interesting. And to be honest, I feel remarkably targeted by their advertising campaign showing these young active families doing DIY and loading up the recreational gear in the back of their pickup truck. The base price of about $20,000 is also pretty attractive, although at this point in my life, my budget might be realistically a little bit lower. Unfortunately, the combination of pandemic supply issues, limiting production, and then what seems to be a pretty good success for Ford have made the Maverick pretty hard to come by, even for sort of a test drive, and for purchase. A lot of them seem to be going over MSRP. So I've been scouring online ads kind of for fun for a different vehicle that could potentially suit the needs of a maker, someone who might need to transport larger objects, plywood, things like that. So I'm taking a page from Car and Driver, and I've been doing a lot of window shopping online for this type of do-it-all vehicle. If you aren't familiar with the show, Car and Driver staff, as well as friends of the show, each week try to find the best vehicle advertised online to meet a specific budget and criteria. Today, I'll be looking at vehicles for makers, specifically in my case, which will complement the Corolla. And with a pretty narrow budget of under $5,000. Because to be honest, if I'm paying cash, that's more the budget that I would be able to sort of save for toward the end of the summer. Lastly, I'm limiting my search to vehicles relatively close to my current location in Salt Lake City, mostly looking at a website called KSL.com. It's a Salt Lake-based news organization with its own classifieds, which is pretty popular in the region. Perhaps the most obvious starting point would be compact pickup trucks other than the Maverick. The Maverick and the Hyundai Santa Cruz being sort of a revitalization of this segment, but several years ago there used to be many more choices. Chevy Love, S10, first generation Colorado, Ford Courier and Ranger, the Mazda BT50 twin to the Ranger, Nissan Hardbody, the older style of Frontier, even Tacoma, although Toyota money is a little hard to come by. Oh, even the Subaru Brat or the Dodge Rampage. I didn't even look for a Rampage. They were these weird little pickups based off of Chrysler's front-wheel drive L platform, which was like the Dodge Omni platform before the K cars replaced it. Oh, wow, there is one. Wow, there is one 5 hours away in Colorado, which does not run, for $700, down from $1,400. Oh my God, they're giving it away. And it has a 5-speed. Maybe I can buy another truck off this list and go pick it up. Never mind. Let's get back to finding a running and driving compact pickup for under $5,000 that I could conceivably actually buy and drive. I don't think my apartment complex would like it if I dropped off a non-running car with 4 flat tires into my parking space. So the first real choice for this challenge is a 2001 Ford Ranger. Now this one's reasonably clean. It's a 5-speed manual, which I like. I think getting a manual on a little work truck like this would be the most sort of entertaining option to buy a truck. There aren't that many pictures, but besides little dings, the truck looks reasonably clean, 150,000 miles. Listing says it was a commuter driving 80 miles a day, which in Utah is perfectly plausible. It's white, just like my Corolla, and actually those dings are in many of the same places so that they would match pretty well. I think this is a pretty solid choice for a little truck. I'd want to take a look underneath just to make sure when the seller says 0 leaks, not 1 drop, make sure that's actually true. I don't need 4-wheel drive or really any towing capacity. So for the criteria of basically something to pick up building materials and transport projects around, I think a little Ford Ranger, a truck like that, is a pretty solid choice. Weirdly, there were more Rangers available for around $6,000. I probably could haggle some of them down to $5,000, but for the sake of this video, we're keeping things limited to under a $5,000 list price. Now my next choice is a little bit of an oddball, but hear me out. It's a Mitsubishi Mighty Max. Now, the lister mentioned that they bought this truck as an impulse buy, and I could see doing exactly the same thing. Compared to the exceedingly practical Ford Ranger I showed, this Mighty Max is on the other end of the light-duty truck spectrum. The roll bar doesn't exactly add practicality, moving things around. To be honest, I probably don't even need 4-wheel drive driving to the hardware store. But this isn't a list of consumer advice, and I hope nobody would listen to me and buy something necessarily off this list, but it is a sort of an opportunity to show my perhaps idiosyncrasies in terms of what my taste for trucks and vehicles is. I happen to really like the look of this Mighty Max. Switch out those lights on that light bar for daylighters, for KC daylighters, and pop on some Goodyear Wrangler tires with the raised white letterings, and you've got a pretty sweet truck, Marty McFly.
Check out that 4x4. That is hot.
Okay, back her up.
Someday, Jennifer. Someday.
And I know the truck in Back to the Future was a Toyota, but I couldn't find a Toyota truck in any sort of good condition or in my budget. And I mean, it still does have a bed, so it'll carry a lot more than my old Corolla, just with a heap more style. Now, does it have high miles? Yes. Does it have a mysterious check engine light that the owner doesn't know what it is because it's pre-OBD2? Yes. It's still pretty freaking rad. Do I love it? I think I do. And nothing is stronger than the power of love. Now, I did try to find an S10 for this competition. I found a fairly clean one, again, for about $6,000 in red, which I actually really liked. But again, gotta keep to the budget. I think if I checked on a different month, there might have been more S10s for around $5,000. I haven't much experience with either of the trucks. Someone may tell me that one is dramatically more reliable than the other. But I think, trying to find a fairly low mile, small truck is a pretty reasonable way for a maker to have a vehicle with a little bit more capability than, say, a small sedan. Next up are full-size trucks. Now, a compact truck makes a lot of sense. Probably for the type of work that I do around the apartment, it would be overkill to buy a full-size truck. And to be honest, whatever second vehicle we need would probably be used for one of us to commute to work as well. So, paying full-size truck gas bills, is something to be wary about. But looking at prices, you can pick up a full-size pickup truck for about the same as a Ford Ranger. And in terms of pounds per truck dollar propositions, that's pretty tempting. And I figure, why not look at trucks that can really do everything? Perhaps even tow a Dodge Rampage from Colorado to Utah. Now, looking at classifieds, there were a lot more General Motors products than Ford, at least where I am. And to be honest, I do kind of like the 1988 to 1999 Chevy CK or GMC CK 1500s more than the contemporary Ford or Dodge offerings. So I mostly looked at those 1500 CK trucks. I don't really need a full-size truck to begin with, so I don't need the 2500 heavy duty, and it's unlikely I would be hitting the capacity even for a half-ton truck with projects that would fit within my apartment. And so those higher tow rating, and so those high tow ratings are not really something that I need. Further, the GMT 400 platform is known for being pretty smooth driving for the time, especially since these had independent front suspension when not all of its competitors did. And I think that they're the best looking trucks from the 80s to the sort of late 90s compared to the F-150 or Dodge offering. So first up is this 1994 Chevy 1500. It's at a dealer in Murray, Utah, which the dealer has fine reviews. It's $4,000, $3,999, listed as one owner and 147,000 miles, which seems pretty low for a truck of this age. And you can find a ton online for well over 200,000 miles. Under 150,000 seems pretty good. It doesn't specify what engine is it in it. There's a couple LS motors that came in these, and a Vortec V6. It does have a 5-speed and it looks pretty clean. The driver's seat is a little blown out, but the paint looks fine and it looks like a good, honest truck. I happen to like the sort of base work truck trim that these come in with the single headlights as opposed to the stacked headlights on the Silverado or the higher trim Chevy and GMC trucks. I actually think this one might have sold. I can't find it on the dealer's website. And it did have 102 favorites on its listing on KSL.com, which, to be honest, makes sense. The next up is sort of the oddball, and that's sort of the theme here, is maybe one reasonable listing and then one maybe less reasonable, but let's say more of a passion project or passion project vehicle. And I know that I said I was looking for a 1500 and I didn't need four-wheel drive, but this Chevy 2500 is really calling my name. Now, it's got some body damage and some body rust. But what is more Utah-an than a retired ski resort truck? I feel like you get yourself a neon windbreaker, some cool retro sunglasses, maybe throw some 1980 skis in the bed, and you are king of the mountain that winter. Heck, maybe even throw on a light bar, some Casey daylighters, and some all-terrains with raised white letters. I mean, yeah, the rust is a worry. Maybe there isn't any on the frame. You'd want to get under that truck to check it out. It is a worry that it's led a hard life, sort of being driven seasonally by, temporary employees maybe. It doesn't have snowplow mounts, which is something. It only has 78,000 miles, so maybe it runs really well. It's a little beat up, and for kind of a work truck for sort of projects, having something a little bit more beat up might mean that you do use it a little bit more. I don't know. I just really like the look of this truck. There is something about this kind of like work truck, especially this one with the Snowbird Resort livery on the side, that just calls to me. It's love. It's the power of love. Now, I am currently working for a certain government agency this summer, and they used to run Chevy CKs too in a very specific color. Let's call it Forest Service green. And I have to say, that would be a really cool, kind of the perfect work truck. The holy grail, if you will, is a old Forest Service green pickup 4x4 with a manual transmission. The Forest Service stopped buying trucks in that green like 20 years ago. Something about how they cost more money up front and then sold for an average of like $1,000 less on the back end, yada, yada, yada. But there was this Jalopnik article about someone who had an old Forest Service truck just like this. And if I saw one for sale, oh man. Or this sweet Forest Service 1977 Dodge that was on Brigand Trailer. All right, well, I'm getting carried away here. The next one may be a hard pill to swallow, but I think for many tasks, a van might actually be a better choice than a pickup truck. Are they as cool? Probably not. Would they seem somewhat out of place commuting to work or to a social event? Yeah, maybe. Do they allow you to transport a lot of materials shielded from the elements? Yeah, they do. If you're looking at a minivan, they get better gas mileage and are easier to drive. I mean, they're essentially, boxes on wheels. And for a maker, it might just make more sense if you were transporting furniture or larger projects in all sorts of weather. And, if you wanted to get into like refurbishing dressers, it maybe makes more sense to get a van to both pick up the unfinished furniture and then deliver those pieces. In terms of value proposition, I think that probably a minivan is the sort of cheapest way of getting into that van life. This Oldsmobile Silhouette, for example, is just within her budget and only might need an unspecified gasket, which I assume is a head gasket. They say that it might just need a tune-up, but I don't know how strong the market for Silhouette vans are. They're pretty interesting, kind of, the pinnacle of high-tech, whatever you want to say, 1990s GM of kind of this forward-looking kind of spaceship design. People say that they look like, Dustbusters. Although I think it's pretty sweet. I don't think that the market is particularly strong for this, and probably $4,900 is a little high. Next up is this 1998 Ford Econoline van. It's a full-size van, and I think pretty reasonable for sort of that picking up things, and maybe if you were a maker, delivering things that you're then selling. If I was going to buy a real commercial van and actually put some money into it, I would try to get something smaller like a Ford Transit Connect or one of those competing small vans that are actually unibody, not based off of a truck chassis. I think they get better gas mileage and a little bit easier to drive within town. But there are a lot of these full-size vans, Econolines especially, kicking about, or the GMC variant, the Safari. With this small a budget, Ford Econolines seem to be making up the majority of what's around, and a lot of them seem to have been like half converted into campers, which is what this one. And I'm thinking maybe I should just start a company that makes cargo vans out of all the half-finished camper conversions out there. But my real choice for a van, as disheartening as it is a Dodge Caravan. They have these stow-and-go seats, so you can actually basically make a flat loading floor in the back, which is pretty substantial. The 5th-gen Caravans were sold up until 2020, I think, so there's a lot of them around, that and the equivalent Town and Country from Chrysler. Those stow-and-go seats really allow you to pretty quickly fold everything down pretty flat, so you can go from driving around a bunch of people to really putting full-size sheets of plywood in the back. This one for $4,100 is actually the Town and Country and seems pretty fully loaded. If you're going to roll in a minivan, you might as well roll hard in a minivan with DVD players, satellite navigation, full leather seating. There are a lot of these out here, and frankly, it makes me sad thinking about just how reasonably you can get a minivan and how well it would probably work for me. Oh, you know what? There's not just stow and go seats. There's also swivel and go seats. Look, you can have everyone face each other and install a little table in the back. That's actually kind of cool. I forgot about those. I actually drove like a fourth gen all-wheel drive Dodge Caravan that my brother-in-law had. I drove that for a little bit in college, and it was pretty sweet. I used it to move once. It was really practical. It was actually really easy to park and drive. Maybe I can still get those raised white letter all-terrains and put some KC daylighters on the front, get the all-wheel drive, a little bit of an off-road van. Last but not least, you have station wagons and SUVs. Oh, I love a good station wagon. Back when I thought I was going to be a successful journalist, I had my eye on those Buick Regal X station wagons when they were just like sitting on dealer lots, slowly getting discounted. And weirdly, they're like almost back up to MSRP, just the way that the used car market is right now. Speaking of Buick wagons, I really covet the Buick Roadmaster, which was the last previous station wagon before the Regal X. From like 1994 on, they were powered by the LT1 engine, which was like a differently tuned version of the same engine that was in the Corvette. They had like a tow package too. It could tow something like 5,000 pounds, which I think some of the like lower trim, less heavy duty GMC 1500s, from the 80s towed about the same, which I think coincidentally is about the weight of a Dodge Rampage on a trailer. But I couldn't find one, and perhaps rightly so. The Roadmaster seems to have just been taken off in value recently. I feel like they were pretty cheap not too long ago, especially if you got one that wasn't in like super good condition. But I feel like they're going for like 12, 13 minimum. You see some online for like 17, 18 grand. I think people are really seeing the value of like a big, comfortable V8 powered rear wheel drive car, because they just kind of don't make those anymore. But it's not going up in value. Ford Freestyles, based on the Ford 500 sedan, which was in turn developed from the Volvo P2 platform back when Ford had like a controlling interest in Volvo. The Freestyle was basically like a tall station wagon. I don't know if that sounds familiar. It was an early crossover. It also had an early implementation of a CVT, constantly variable transmission. Take that for whatever it's worth. But my dad actually had one of these. He used it to replace a Buick Rendezvous, another early crossover related to the Pontiac Aztek. Although we don't talk about the Buick Rendezvous or its relation to the Aztek in my family. But the Freestyle was roomy, comfortable. We took it on a lot of road trips as a kid. I partially learned how to drive in that car, and it put in like 300,000 miles pretty trouble-free until that CVT went out. Now, they eventually renamed the Freestyle the Taurus X, and they named the 500 the Taurus after Ford abandoned its plan to name everything F something except for the Mustang. But in the process of that, they had like a mild facelift where they added these like silver chrome bars. But they actually changed the engine and gave it like a standard transmission with gears. And so it ended up with a 3.5 liter Duratec, making like 265 horse, which gave it a pretty respectable 7.70 to 60. So, although I have the association with the Freestyle, and I actually prefer the look of the front of it, the Taurus X with that more standard transmission and the pretty reasonable power to weight there is the one that I would be looking for. Now, I found one listed for $4,800, all-wheel drive, which is kind of nice. To be honest, probably wouldn't be bad on a list of just winter beater cars. Get some snow tires, KC daylighters on the roof rack. Sorry, I just really like the off-road light look. And right now, I just have a Corolla, and I can't put those lights on there, I think. But that's the last of the window shop vehicle picks for myself. You know, that Freestyle, that Taurus X being something with a little bit more room for projects. And that's kind of the bottom line on all of these, is some sort of cargo capacity as I continue to grow as a maker and kind of need to be able to transport lumber and things like that. But I did ask my girlfriend for some suggestions, and the first is a more traditional SUV. It's this Mercury Mountaineer with 105,000 miles on it. It's basically the Mercury variant of the Ford Explorer. I think it's not a bad choice. $4,900. Looks pretty clean. It says that it's one owner, and you know, this sort of suburban setting that you find it in, I kind of believe that. I do kind of like this vestige of the really bad, like, Ford brand engineering, where Mercuries were essentially just Ford, you know, Explorers with different grills on them and like nicer leather seats just thrown in. She also suggested a school bus, which does meet the hauling requirements. This one does have a small oil leak, and I don't know if that's small for a school bus or just small generally, but has otherwise been well maintained. Not quite sure on gas mileage. And lastly, and this one I actually think is pretty cool, is a 1963 Willys wagon, which does not run, but the owner assures us it won't take much to get it running. I mean, it's a cool truck, and actually it has off-road lights and off-road wheels already. I think if I had a driveway, it would be kind of a nice project vehicle for sure. Now, which of these vehicles would I actually buy? Well, this is window shopping after all, and I don't have to buy any of them. Honestly, I think something like a Ranger with as few miles as possible would be the most prudent. Maybe stretching that budget to get something as new as possible, you know, after the year 2000. If I keep looking long enough, there's also always the chance that I do find that Forest Service green truck. Maybe it would even be, I've seen some Forest Service S10s for sale. Or maybe like a retired fire truck. Oh man, I saw an old brush breaker in Massachusetts for sale that looked so cool. Or a highway truck in orange. If you stuck with this whole thing, maybe consider subscribing. Again, this is a new channel without much of a track record, but I do have some videos in the pipeline, including one where I paint a bike frame. This bike frame, with images reflecting all 5 of the national parks in Utah. I'm also building a working model of a Boston subway car, the MBTA Red Line. And I know perhaps model trains and cars and bicycles may be a little all over the place, but I'm basically trying to put up projects that I'm working on, and we'll see where we end up. But thank you, and goodbye.